Okay, so I can only, here I am. Hi guys. So you're really not gonna see much of me today because of the way the camera is set up. But let me show you what colors we're using. So we're gonna use our same two brushes. We've got a bushy brush here and then a straighter, this is an ivory bristle brush. Hey Darlene, good to see you. Tracy. So the colors that we're using are ultramarine blue. I use ultramarine blue green shade, but I tested it all out. It's also really close to Utrecht's ultramarine blue that you can get in a bigger tube, so it's a little more economical. Burnt sienna, yellow ochre pale. You can use yellow ochre, that's fine, or yellow ochre light, and cadmium yellow, and this is titanium white. And today we're going to be painting this pear here. So we're kind of continuing on the still life theme, but we're going to work primarily on doing an underpainting. And the reason why this is helpful, first of all, it helps you to refine your drawing, which is maybe not as important in landscapes unless you're trying to capture something that's very, maybe it's a place that's very significant, so it matters if the trees are right or you know, where the buildings are set in the landscape. Or if you're painting something like the Grand Canyon that's very noticeable, then you might need to be a bit more precise with your drawing. The nice thing about landscapes is you can move around trees and trim bushes and move a road and all of that stuff. When you're working on a person, if you start taking too many liberties, especially if you're trying to capture a likeness, if you take too many liberties, you're going to lose that likeness. And then same thing with like cats and dogs and cows and animals and that sort of thing, or even buildings. If you start to kind of do your own thing, if you don't focus on the drawing, unless you're intentionally trying to do just an interpretation or something that's more abstract, then you're gonna lose, it's just not gonna look very real, all of that. So underpaintings are a way to draw on your canvas and to kind of get your values right. Values are just light and dark. To get your values and contrast and the drawing right before you start adding color. So it allows you to focus on one thing at a time. And that is it's a fantastic thing, especially when you're first starting. If you can just focus on the values in the drawing at one time, that's a lot more like sketching. And then you can focus on adding color. And you can do this in acrylics too. A lot of people do their underpaintings in acrylics. I'm just putting just a little bit of gamsol on my canvas just to wet it, just a touch. And then I'm gonna put a little puddle on my palette here. I just pulled it out with a brush. This is gamsol. You can use like turpentine, mineral spirits. And then to that, I'm gonna add, this is what I always do for underpaintings or toning a canvas. I'll use burnt sienna and just a little bit of ultramarine blue. Just mix it up. And this is what we're gonna work with most of the time. And I picked to do a Bosque pear so that it was, it doesn't have a lot of color in it to begin with. It's very, so this painting is gonna be very tonal. We will add some color to it, but this is gonna allow us to really focus on the underpainting. And for some of you, you may just love underpaintings. Sometimes I really like leaving things like portraits and some animals, like those rabbits that I've done, the hares, they are mostly an underpainting with just a little bit of color added, just the ever so slightest bit. So I've used the bushy brush here to cover my canvas. I'm using a 6x8, but it's okay if you're using something smaller or bigger. And then I'm getting a paper towel and I'm just gonna blot it away. This is how I start all of my paintings on canvas or linen. I like to have a toned background. And I've talked about it before that the reason you do this is, first of all, it just, especially if you're intimidated by a white surface, it just gets some color on. The other thing that it helps with is seeing color, because if you notice now, the tone of the canvas is very similar to the tone of my palette. So it helps me then when I'm mixing colors on my palette, they look the same on the canvas. Whereas if I mix a color here and put it on bright white, it's gonna look different. So this just kind of helps me have some continuity when it comes to mixing. So I'm gonna use this bushy brush so I can be really loose with my drawing. And like we did last week, I will switch though probably to the ivory synthetic bristle brush. What we want to pay attention to is just shapes and light and shadow. So we've got, just gonna kind of start on this pear. It has kind of a straight side there, gets a little rounder. And we've got this side here, just keeping it really loose. And then in a tonal drawing, you don't want to draw, like in a value drawing, it's not about drawing lines. Our tendency when we draw is that we want to like draw the lines of a pear. And this is not what we're doing. We're not drawing the lines of a pear. We're drawing where the shadows are. Okay, so we're finding the shadows of the pear. And because we're focusing on drawing for the point of being able to do a still life or animals, let's try to be pretty precise with our drawing. I'm gonna mix a little bit more paint in. I feel like I'm gonna kind of blot this a bit. I'll just wipe it. And this is where the underpainting is great. You're drawing a face, it looks, you know, it doesn't look like how you want it to. You just wipe it away and start again. I mixed just a little bit more paint in. If your paint is kind of dripping, then it's just too thin and you just got to mix a little bit more paint in. And I felt like it was a little too thin. It was kind of slipping. So let's try this again. So that line is too harsh. So that's making my color much stronger, which I like. Okay, I'm liking this shape better. So this is, if you feel like super intimidated about drawing, then this is such great practice for you to just sit here, and you can use the same canvas and kind of over and over again work on painting something, and just, you can keep erasing it until you're happy with it. So I'm not drawing the whole pear, I'm just drawing the shadows of the pear. See, it's a little lighter here, so I'm going to allow that to be a little bit lighter. So just kind of keep your paper towel handy. And then what we want to ask with everything that we draw is what's next to it lighter or darker? So what we see here is this fold in the fabric is darker than the pear. So we're not going to make the pear darker, we're going to make this fold in the fabric darker. And we're going to use that fold to indicate where the end of our pear is, not a line that we're drawing for our pear. And then we have another fold here. All right, and then we've got this shadow here. And we're also going to talk about lost edges, which is really fun. Like if you feel like your work looks maybe too literal, something that you can work on is, where can I lose the edges? Where do I not need to draw a line? So what we're even going to do is, like between the pear and the shadow, especially right here, like we're just not even going to draw a line. We're just going to let one blend into another. And this shadow does get a little bit lighter, so we're going to let it get a little lighter. We're even going to, paper towel is a great way to just blot things away. The other thing that you can do is keep a brush that's just a clean brush. Like this is just a little it's a short filbert brush by Rosemary. You can take a clean brush and use it to sort of pull some of the paint away or to blend a little bit. So especially if this is going to be like your finished painting, you're not going to add any color, then you can be a little bit more precise. So I'll pull some paint off, clean off the brush on the paper towel, and then, so we've got a little bit of a highlight there and a little bit of one back here. It's a little lighter where we've got some bounced light, and along here. It doesn't matter what brush you use to do this. You can just, whatever, if you have a clean brush, just use a clean brush. And then we can kind of use this to spread this pear up a little bit more. I think these tonal paintings are so pretty. And then again, we've got, if we look at this part of the pear, what's lighter? Is it the pear or the background? The pear is lighter, the background's darker. So we're gonna come in and draw the background around the pear. And it gets a little softer, starts to just sort of disappear. So we don't want to make that too harsh. We're going to kind of follow these folds. Now, the fabric is not the star of the show. It's the pear. So we don't want this to be, we just want this to be suggested. I think a common thing that you see from beginner artists, and I can say this because I did it too, is you just feel like you have to draw every line. You feel like everything kind of has to look like just as you're seeing it, and it, you know, then you, things can look kind of harsh, especially when you're doing a still life and you have a lot of light and shadows and fabric. It can just start to look a little harsh. Now we have this sort of highlight coming across where the stem is, so we don't want to lose that. Okay, you can come on in. I have a child who needs, I think needs me to put in a password for school, so he's going to be doing that. Sure you guys are dealing with this, so quick timeout. Here, I can do the password real quick then. You're just on Facebook Live right now, Marshall.
Oh, yay. What an honor.
All right. Hopefully my hands are clean enough. You good? Okay.
You want Esme in here?
No, take the cat. Take the cats out. Esme's our cat. I do not want a cat in here. Okay, so what I've done is I have rolled my paper towel into a point, and then I have dipped it into my gamsol, and then I'm using, oh, no, Esme, get out of here. Okay, we've got a cat in here. Go on. Go on. Go on. Just come grab her. I don't want her getting into my paint and stuff. Okay, so we're taking this rolled up paper towel, putting it in some of our gamsol, and then we're using it to wipe out the highlights with a paper towel. You can do this with a brush too.
Okay, I got it.
You got it? Thanks. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. That is just life now with kids not in school. Okay, so I'm wiping out the highlights here. We've got a good highlight here that will kind of blur into that. And we've definitely got a bright highlight there. You can do this with a brush too. So if you want to use a brush, we got a little highlight up here, and then we've got a highlight there. I love how warm these paintings look. But you can use, you can use a clean brush to kind of soften those lines. I wish I could hear you guys. I feel like, oh gosh, if somebody showed me how to do this when I was first starting out, oh, it's just such a game changer. It just gives you a chance to really work on your painting. It's also a great way to work in stages. So if you just want to do one part of a painting, you know, if you don't have a ton of time and you just want to do a part of it, you can work on the underpainting and let it dry and then add the color over it. That is why a lot of people like to use acrylics for their underpaintings, so that it'll dry quicker and then they can start painting on it. But you can, I paint on wet underpaintings all the time. You can leave them wet or dry. The downside to working with acrylics is you can't manipulate them as much as I am. These oils stay wet, so I'm able to continue to, you know, kind of play around with them, move them around, wipe them off with gamsol. You can't quite do that as much with acrylics. So, and if you're working with, I know I have some people who work with gouache. What you'll have to do is kind of do your underpainting and then, you know, and then add your color on top once it's dried. You can also do this exercise, like just do an underpainting and then add so I want to make this a little darker here. You can just do an underpainting and then you can do a separate painting off of that, kind of use that underpainting as a study. But like I said, some people, like, they do the underpainting and then they just stop there because they like how it looks. And it's really pretty. They just look, they kind of glow. They look really warm. I've sort of switched to this little filbert brush. I need to switch back to a brush that you guys have. But you just use whatever brush is serving you. This shadow is not a straight shadow. And the line of this shadow, I'm going to take a paper towel and kind of fix the line of that shadow a little bit more. Kind of falls away a bit more. And I don't want this highlight to be, this to me looks just a little distracting. So I'm going to soften that just a little bit. If you want more drama in your picture, then you want more contrast. Less drama, have it a little softer than less contrast. And another thing that you want to pay attention to is, with contrast, is like where it's used in the painting. So a nice trick is to use the highest amount of contrast where you want the focus to be, because wherever there's high contrast, that's where your eyes are gonna, that's where your eyes are gonna go. Okay, let's get this stem in here. So I would use, let me switch. I'll use the straight bristle brush for this one. Where is that? It's on my lap. Okay. Got it. And then I'll take a second, once we're kind of done with this, I'll take a second to see if you guys have some questions. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them now. I know you guys are all painting too. I love stems on pears. I feel like, really stems on anything. When I look for pumpkins, I always look for pumpkins that have a good stem. And if I'm looking for produce to paint, I want to find produce with good stems, with good personality. So it's really, really dark back behind this stem here. I'm mixing up just a little bit more paint. It's the same mix. It's ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Those are, like, other than white, those are probably what I use the most. Those are like my favorites. Okay, so it's really dark back here. The stem almost blends in. And then we've got a little ring around and a little, so I'm going to wipe all the paint off my brush and get it really clean as I can. And I'm going to kind of wipe out a little highlight there, because we've got some nice little highlights in that stem. Okay, and then I'm going to clean up this line a little bit. So this is darker here. And we kind of lost that edge a little bit. And I'm wiping my brush away just to kind of feather this out a bit. Soften it up, not have too hard of a line. Just soften that up a little bit too. This also just kind of teaches you a different way of drawing, that it's just about looking at light and shadow and always asking the question, is this lighter, is this darker? And then just making it that. And I know it's like, well, that's really simple. That's oversimplifying things. But it really is true. It really, and it's such an effective way to draw. So much more than, again, our tendency to draw a pear is to do like, you know, is to draw the lines of it. Here's the pear. That's what we want to do. But when we draw all of the shadows and highlights, what happens is we get this very three-dimensional form, and it looks much more realistic. So there we go. I'm pretty happy with that. So let me take a look at your questions. I'll let you, I also want to know if you like this setup better. I know you can't see me, but you can see kind of a better look at the painting. Okay. Oh, and Noelle, I love that. You're awakening me in a long, not lost desire to do exactly what you're teaching. And Carol, yeah, this is fascinating, isn't it? It's such a great way to do this. And Tina, you teach watercolor workshops. I'm looking to try online. So I'm using my iPhone right now. Okay, and I'm getting good feedback on this setup that you guys like this. How did you first learn to paint? So Carol, I committed to do, now oil painting. I did murals and some things before, but I committed to do 100 landscapes. And I just did it. And in painting 100 paintings, I learned so much. And I just caught the bug. I loved it. So many of you have said how much you love this. So Susan, you've always painted with pastels, never oils. My hat's off to you, Susan. I tried pastels and I have such a hard time with with the smudgy and the layers and mixing colors. I found it really tough. So with acrylics, you sketch out with a pencil and then go in with color. So you can do, there are oil artists who do that too, who sketch with a pencil first and then paint, or who do an extremely detailed drawing and then paint. But I feel like I'm better with a brush than a pencil. I enjoy painting more than I enjoy drawing, if that makes sense. So I prefer to do it all in paint. But there's no right or wrong way. It's just your way. You talk to 100 different artists and you're going to find 100 completely different methods for doing things, and that's okay. What kind of canvas am I using? This is from Source Tech. It's a primed, let's see, I think this is a canvas panel. So it's an acrylic primed canvas panel. I also do oil primed linen panels from there, and it's mounted on a birch board. And I like doing these because they're really easy to store, they're easy to ship, and you don't have the sagging and the puncture issues and stuff that you do with a stretched canvas. So I've done watercolors here and there, but always made the deliberate lines and couldn't figure out why it didn't look great. So yeah, when you see that in sketches, like notice that when you look at sketches, like especially somebody like John Singer Sargent, he's not drawing lines, he's drawing shadows and highlights, and his, they just look so vivid and alive. So Jody, yours is not wiping clean like mine does. So first of all, are you using gamsol to wipe it away? Are you using oils? And then first of all, are you using oils? Are you using gamsol to wipe it away? And what kind of canvas are you using? Any kind of canvas that's primed in gesso you should be able to wipe some away. Okay. Seeing if there are any other questions. These are all hellos. Excited to start learning. Suzanne, I do paint the sides of my canvas when I'm all done. I don't use the underpainting. I don't do an underpainting on them. And what do you use to clean my brushes? So Deborah, I'm just wiping them off with paper towels while I'm using them. And then afterwards, I use Murphy's Oil soap. And then I use actually a brush soap that's sold with my milk paint line, Miss Mustard Seeds brush soap. And I use that to condition the brushes. Yeah, somebody said that you liked, Susan said you like to paint instead of drawing too. So what do you consider with composition in a painting? So we can talk about that. Can you move your palette up so we can see it the whole time? Yes, Angela, I haven't been showing it because it's the same mix. I've just been using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna with a little bit of gamsol. That's all I've been using the whole time. But I will show, once we mix colors, I'll show that more. Yes, and I'll move the palette up. A couple other people are asking that. The other thing too is there are different kinds, hold on, I have squirrel brain a lot, and I'm trying to answer like 3 questions at one time. So can you paint over a bad painting? Yes, you can. I prefer to just throw bad paintings in the garbage because I don't want to look at them anymore, but I would put a coat of gesso over something, but yes, you can. Especially if you're on a super tight budget and you just have to make it work, then you can paint over bad paintings. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is the texture. Is there a texture on it that's going to show through? And then, what was the other question? Oh, about composition. Okay, I'll answer that in a second. Are you self-taught by trial and error or reading books, or did you take classes? Yes, everything. I learned the most from doing. So I learned the most from painting. I read a lot of books. These are all of my art books, and I've read more that I've checked out from the library, but these are ones that I own because I wanted to be able to end here and there and under there. So I read a lot, and I also... I've taken a few online classes as well. I share in my painting resource page what classes I've taken. And I just paint a lot. Try to paint almost every day. And do you just keep adding paint? So Tina, I just keep adding paint to these piles. I'll scrape them away if they're crusty or dried out. But if I'm painting once a week, I can kind of keep using these piles and just keep adding to them. And then I just clean off the center of my palette. Okay. Robin, you missed the first part of the session and did not add ultramarine blue. Yeah, you're fine. Your painting probably is going to look a little more orange than mine does, but that's okay. Yeah, and Mary said she finally got her Rosemary and Company brushes, and they're so much better. Well, you said they're different. I'm assuming they're better. And hi, Monica from Littlestown. We used to be neighbors. Well, kind of. Just a little town away. Okay, so let me talk about composition a little bit. I'm putting my phone back on here, so I'm not going to see your questions for a little bit, but I'll pick them up and answer again. So let me answer a couple of the questions. First of all, on composition. So there's all kinds of technical information about composition, there's sort of this spiral, I think, what is it called? The golden mean or something like that is a good example of, how you should set up your composition. There's the rule of thirds. You're sort of dividing, which I sort of did this. You're dividing your canvas into a grid of thirds. So we've got, this is 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts, and same way the other way. And things tend to look more pleasing if they're sitting on one of those invisible grid lines. So in this case, we really did put this sort of the dividing line between the backdrop and what the pear is sitting on at the third. It's a little above the third mark, but at about the third. And then same thing with the pear. The pear is sort of sitting right in the middle of that section. So it tends to look better if things are sitting on one of those. So you could move the pear over here if you wanted to and have it kind of at an angle. I found with composition that it's something that since I've done styling and photography, it was fairly intuitive for me, but I do still have trouble with it, especially with landscapes, kind of balancing it all out. And a great book for that, I shared it, let me grab it here real quick. I shared it a few weeks ago, but it's Edgar Payne, Composition of Outdoor Painting. And it's a pretty technical book. It's a lot of words, but then it has all of these wonderful little thumbnail value sketches showing composition. And so this is a great thing to pull out, maybe some inspiration photos that you took that are like, man, I love this picture, but it's not working. And then say like, okay, it has a big tree in it. So then you can look at this and say, all right, well, let me sort of follow this guideline and recrop my picture so the tree is off to the side. We've got the land in the back and the clouds are kind of balancing it all out. So this is a really good book for that. And then I shared The Art of Still Life by Todd Casey. That talks a lot about composition in still life. So, so I would recommend that. So I think, trying to figure out which brush I want to use. Maybe I'll use this straighter brush for right now. So I'm gonna take some paper towels and just wipe it off a little bit. So if you have your gamsol out, which I did, you can put the lid on. We're not gonna really use it right now anymore. I'm just gonna wipe the brush and we're gonna add color. So did you all kind of get the underpainting done? Or something close enough? We can keep on moving. Okay. So we're gonna start by painting the pear. And what's kind of cool about what we have going on is this really is pretty close to the pear's colors. So we're not gonna actually have to do a lot of painting on it. What I'm doing right now is I'm using my brush. This is just a clean synthetic bristle brush. This is our straight brush. And I'm just blurring this line a little bit. And the reason why you want to do that, so when we look at it in a picture, we see it as this really hard line because cameras are great at focusing on things, especially iPhone cameras. And so it's focusing on the background, it's focusing on the pear. But when you look at a pear in real life, we sort of focus like right here. And what's happening along the edges kind of fades away. We don't see those hard edges. That's kind of one of the downsides to painting off of photographs is everything is clear. So I want this line to be just a little bit softer. And this is also point, like if say I did this painting yesterday and I came back and I'm like, oh, I'm looking at this pear and I see that maybe this is a little bit wider than I originally drew it. This is where you can fix things. So when I do cows and when I do portraits, I'll do the underpainting like this in one sitting, and then I will leave it alone and come back to it. And always I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. What's going on? This eyeball's higher than the other. And then I'll make adjustments. But sometimes you have to walk away to really be able to see that. So this is still, I'm just pulling from this mix. This is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and it's got a little bit of gamsol in it to thin it down. So I'm just now making a few minor adjustments to my drawing. And if I want to wipe anything away, you can use a clean brush or you can use your paper towel. What's kind of nice about the paper towel is it forces you to do some blurry lines. It forces you to not be super precise. And one thing I'm noticing here too is that this highlight comes down and creates a little bit of an edge. So we'll have that highlight come down. Now, the downside though to having to kind of fix the drawing after you've done it is, you know, if you walk away and do it the next day, the paint is drier, you know, and it won't wipe away as easily. But it'll still wipe away, it just won't wipe away as easily. Okay, so I'm kind of softening out the shadow there. Okay, so I'm gonna start with adding in, so into this mixture, I'm gonna add in a little bit of burnt sienna. And working with, so when you see people talk about colors being transparent versus opaque, I remember kind of reading about that when I was first starting painting and just feeling a little overwhelmed, like how does that pertain to me and what I'm doing? And in using the paint, I started to learn. So as you're applying this ultramarine blue and burnt sienna mix, it's very transparent. It's very see-through. You have to kind of lay it on thick to get it so that it's covering well. And that is what a transparent color feels like. When you are, a good example of an opaque color is titanium white. As soon as you add white to this mixture, it's going to become much more opaque. So right now we're keeping it really transparent. And the thing about transparent paints that's really cool is you can use them like for glazes and all kinds of things. So what I'm doing right now is using this burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I added more if you want it darker, add more ultramarine blue. So I forget who it was who didn't add the ultramarine blue in the beginning. You want to add it now so you can get these darker shadows. So I'm looking at my painting, my eyes are going back and forth between my painting and my picture, and I'm just trying to fill in the very darkest part of the shadow. It kind of comes up a little bit there. And then we've got a really dark part here, and this is where we can lose an edge. Now I know it's like, well, we've already painted this with the underpainting, but you see how I'm making it darker, I'm refining the drawing a little bit, and as we start adding color, it's gonna make more sense. Okay, so it's pretty dark through there. So we're just gonna lose this edge entirely. We're not gonna draw that line of the pear. Once you start doing that, like doing the kind of lost and found edges, it's like, it's addictive. It's just so fun. I'm adding just a little bit more ultramarine blue just to keep that darker. So we are, for those of you who said you do watercolors, oil is exactly the opposites. We start with the darkest colors and move to the lightest. And I know with watercolor, you start with the lightest colors and move to the darkest. So this is, you have to switch your brain. All right, and then this is really dark. And this side of the stem's really dark, so we're gonna darken that even more. If you are putting, like trying to put paint on and you're pulling it off, pulling paint off, means you don't have enough paint. You gotta get a little more paint on your brush. And I know, especially when you're just starting out and you're working with little tubes of paint, and you're like, this tube of paint, especially the cadmiums, this tube of paint was like 20 bucks. You don't want to use much paint, but you really do have to use the proper amount of paint. Especially if you want to do more of an impressionistic look, or if you really like a painterly look, you've got to use a lot of paint. Okay, so I'm darkening the stem, and then I don't want it to be this super sharp, clean stem. I want it to be just a little bit blurry. And then like we did with the pear last week, we're gonna use, I'm using a clean brush here now. I just kind of wiped off a little bit of paint to pull some paint off. Like we did last week, we're gonna use painting the background to kind of clean things up here. And if you really want to clean an area too, you can dip your brush in gamsol. So I'm going to do that to kind of clean it a little bit better, and then use the gamsol to kind of refine that edge just a little bit. So I'm kind of wiping it away, and then I'm going to use my paper towel to dry it. So if you're like, oh, I don't like the shape of my stem, or I don't like the shape of my pear, you can just kind of do that to wipe it away a little bit. All right, so we've got a little highlight here that we're gonna keep along the side. It's not as bright as these highlights. And then I wanna just start blending this a little bit. Because the shadows are not hard. That's why, one reason why I picked this. I like how soft this photo is. I've painted this pear once before. I started taking pictures of all the things I painted, so if I wanted to paint them again, or if I wanted to just check my work, I could. All right, now we're gonna start adding some color, and what we're gonna add is a little bit of, so to this mixture, we're gonna add a little bit of yellow ochre. Now what happens is yellow ochre, when it touches ultramarine blue, can start to turn green. We don't really want it to be green, so we're gonna balance that out with some burnt sienna. We wanna keep this just a kind of a golden brown, and you'll see as soon as you started adding yellow ochre, it started to give the paint body, because yellow ochre is more opaque. So we're gonna start getting the mid-tones of the pear, where the shadow transitions. And we don't have to do a ton of this mid-tone. We got a little bit through here. And then we'll make this little highlight out of this mid-tone, because it's a very subtle highlight. It's not, we don't want to go in there with white. But we got just a little highlight there. And then in this pile that we just mixed, let's add some more yellow ochre to make this even more yellow. So the yellow ochre is adding more opaqueness to the paint, and it's also adding more light, a greater sense of light. So we'll kind of use this next. We're gonna have to go a little lighter there. We're just putting it kind of where we see these mid-tone values. So we haven't added any white yet. We'll put a little bit of this over here along the edge. We're just moving very gently to the lighter, because this is a very subtle tonal painting. I'm putting a little bit more down here. Another thing is, if you find, and I do this, I start to get like really close and tight, just back off of the brush. Okay, now let's do some more yellow ochre pale. And now we're gonna add in just a little bit of white, just to start lightening this up. The paint is getting a little thicker and a little lighter. And we're going to the next lightest color. We'll maybe put a little bit, this is kind of a pretty bright little highlight down here. We'll emphasize that a little bit. And another color I'm gonna mix up. So we've got this yellow. Let's take a little bit of white and mix it more into, we'll grab a little burnt sienna, just so we have a color that's still light, but that has, it's a different color. So we've got kind of some variation, because I notice along here it's a little bit redder. Oh, let's even do a little bit more burnt sienna. Just makes it a little bit more interesting if you can get some color variation in there. And I'm gonna use this more reddish color along here, because that's what I'm kind of seeing. I'd say a little bit down into here. So something that's really normal is if you're doing your painting and you're like, so I'm going back into this yellow. I'm gonna make it even a little more yellow and add just a little bit more white. So a normal thing is to do your painting and just continue to tell yourself how bad it is. That's a normal thing, but it's wonderful. Like, I'm feeling this right now as I'm painting this. I'm like, oh, I love this painting. I'm so happy with how it turns out, how it's turning out. But it's also really normal to love it and walk away and like go have dinner and then come back and be like, oh my gosh, what was I so smitten with? This looks terrible. So it's all normal, all the emotions. It's all normal. So I see even just a teeniest little highlight back there. So I'm gonna just kind of blend that in a little bit. Let it be a little bit lighter. Just a subtle little shift. Okay. And we've got, I'm adding just a little bit more white to my yellow mix here. So see, all the colors we're working with, it's just really, really subtle. Very subtle. We're not getting crazy. We've got a little bit of some brightness right there. So let's kind of get some of that in. And then it's brighter there. So I'm gonna now add more white to the yellow. And if you want, I'm not seeing a lot more red, but if you want to add a little bit more white to the burnt sienna, you can too. It's nice to have a little bit of variation. And I think that's one thing that you really learn with practice is the subtleties of the colors that you're mixing, when you start, the tendency is to make all the contrasts are greater. Let's see, I'm gonna add more white to this yellow mixture, and I'm gonna add just the teeniest little, see, this yellow is getting a little dry. So I grabbed more than I intended because I had to root around in there a little bit. I'm gonna grab just a little bit of cadmium yellow. I don't wanna make this super bright, but the thing that cadmium yellow does is it gives a sense of light. It gives a sense of kind of warmth. Oh guys, hang on. I gotta plug my phone in. I wasn't planning on using my phone, and now I just am getting like low battery mode. I had my computer all plugged in and ready to go. So this is that lighter mix that I'm putting in. This is where one of our brighter highlights is. And then it kind of continues up here. And I'm just sort of blending it in very softly, and then we've got a nice highlight here and sort of down through here. But just as you're doing this, just kind of take a minute to appreciate how much thicker this paint is now than when we just had the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Okay, and I'm just kind of blending this in, and you can always go back and get a little bit of the darker color to kind of help with that transition a bit. And also go get a little more red. This is just the playing part. I don't want to blend that shadow over too much. So I'm wiping my brush down, and then, so it's relatively a clean brush, and I'm just gonna, I've got a little bit of highlight through here. Gonna wipe it, and now I wanna just blend these lines just a little bit. The thing with oil painting is when you get into blending too much, that's when your colors start to get muddy. And that's kind of the charm of oil painting, is sort of laying it down and letting it just sit there, not over blending too much. It's a benefit to be able to blend, definitely. Like, you can't do this with acrylics. If you're working with acrylics, they're already dry. And I think I want a bit more of this red under there. Especially the thing that can be tough to recover from is if you get too much of the white or the yellow over into the shadow, it becomes really difficult to get it out. Okay, let me plug my phone in. You guys just keep on working away. Just take me a second here. So Haley, your supplies finally showed up. Awesome. Glad to hear that. And Yasmin, it's good to see you. I've known Yasmin for a long time. Okay. All right, plugged in now. So I'm happy with how the pear is. I think I'm gonna kind of leave it. I might add, let me add a little bit more burnt sienna along there. So another thing you can do that's kind of interesting, this is where just your interpretation can come through. Like, if you just want to leave your pear really warm like this, you can. If you want to add in a little bit, I'm going to add a little more of a shadow there. I feel like we kind of lost a little shadow. But you can add in a little bit of cool colors in here too, and that's just an artistic choice. Like, I'm not really seeing any like blues in here or purples, but it would be kind of an interesting thing to add just a touch of a blue. So I've got ultramarine blue here. I'm going to mix in some burnt sienna. I have a little white in there. And I'm making it more burnt sienna than ultramarine blue. Well, no, actually, I guess I'm going back in the other direction. So I'm kind of mixing up this deep purpley color, and maybe I just want to put a little bit in there. Just as a little variation, a little bit of depth. And then if I want to add a little bit of blues in the lighter, then I can, adding in some white, and then I'll add in just a little bit more ultramarine blue here. So this is just personal interpretation. Maybe add in just a little touch of blue, just a tiny bit. And you don't have to do this. I just want to give you an example of, like, you know, you can kind of break free and do what looks good to you, what you want to do. So I've got a teeny touch of blue there. It might actually be interesting too to do, like, I feel like this highlight maybe looks a little bit cooler than the rest of the pear. So even going a little bit whiter with it and adding just a little bit of a couple little cool touches through there, maybe up here. Okay, and then I think I'm going to leave this stem right now, and we'll take care of adding this little highlight to the stem when we do the background. So I'm going to switch to my bushier brush because we don't need quite as much precision. And let's start with the shadows. So I'm going to work in this pile that I've got mixed of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I'm going to mix up more of that pretty evenly. I think we'll want. All right, I've got people calling my kids right now. Like, Mom's doing a Facebook Live. Not right now. And then I want to grab quite a bit of white. And we'll adjust this color. This is too muddy. I'm not liking this. It's kind of a good neutral gray, but I'm still not liking it. So I'm adding more blue. Okay, and then we need to have a bit of a darker pile. I'm just kind of putting it off to the side of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, same deal. We're just making it a bit darker, so there's really no white in it except for anything residual that's left on the brush. And both of these mixes, I'm making more blue than burnt sienna because I feel like the shadows in this painting kind of look a little more blue. Okay, so I'm not gonna mess with this shadow because do you see how much lighter, even just that, how much lighter that is? So we wanna be really careful not to disrupt that really cool shadow that we have going on. So we'll put this in here. And again, ask, is it lighter? Is it darker? Is it about the same? So I'm looking through the shadows. Where are the darker shadows? This is darker here. I'm using kind of this darker color. That's darker. We got a little bit of a darker line here. I want to keep this line really soft though. Again, I don't want this to be distracting. This is darker. We don't want to lose our cool highlights here. We can shape the pear, and we can always go back and add them in if we need to. We've got a little bit of highlight that kind of runs behind the stem. So this is just all about observing. Is it lighter? Is it darker? Is this bigger or smaller? And we're just sort of putting this in. We don't want to lose that cool highlight back there. Okay, so I feel like that's kind of the darker parts of the shadow. So now I'm going to go to this mix that's lighter. It's got more white in it. And start kind of finishing this out. And I'm using this bushy brush and just kind of rubbing it in. I don't want this to be really heavy. This is, again, this is kind of a supporting cast. This is just the backdrop. We do not want this to be like, wow, that's some wrinkled fabric back in the background. Just keep it really light, which so many of, oh my goodness, if you look at my earlier paintings, it's like that. It's just like, wow, what's going on there? And that's okay. If yours is like that, that's okay. Okay, so we want this line to be a little bit blurry. I think I'm gonna have to try to cut this though and make it a little bit straighter. Okay, I like that. And it is a little, you see the light almost glows around the pear a little bit, which is really kind of cool. Okay, we got that a little bit. We'll finish out the shadow in this color. And I'm just sort of, I want this to retain some texture. I'm not someone who's gonna paint every little line and shadow. It's just too tedious for me. I don't like that. So I'm doing a few little like kind of crisscrossy motions. That's a very technical term, but maybe mixing a little bit of the dark in there just to allude to the fact that this is textural. It's not a smooth surface. We've got some textures, little folds, little variations. It's not like on a piece of marble or something. Okay, and I'm gonna, to this mixture, so this is kind of our mid-tone shadow, I'm gonna add more titanium white to it, and I'm gonna start adding a little bit of yellow ochre, just to kind of warm it up a little bit, and it's gonna make this background color even more harmonious with the pear, since the pear has all these colors in it too. It's just like we're using just four colors and white, because we did use a little bit of cadmium yellow. There's so much, a lot of like the cow paintings I do and stuff is with just those colors, just burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and yellow ochre pale. A whole painting with just those. So we'll get that little highlight in there. And then these are kind of we're not doing highlights yet. We're still pretty in a pretty mid-tone area on the color, like on the value scale. We're not getting really light yet. So I think we can do this here. Because if we're actually at about the same value as the pear right here. It's not dramatically lighter or darker. Okay, and just kind of blending that in. And the nice thing is we've got that underpainting, so like it's completely okay if you just leave some of that showing. You don't have to cover the whole canvas with it. I'm using a little bit more of our darker mid-tone here. Whoops, got a little chunk in my paint. Let's get that out. I'm just gonna blend it. I will probably come in and cut around that with my other brush. Right now I want that stem to be a little bit cleaner. So I'll do that in a minute. We'll just finish working on the background here. And it's okay if you like to have some kind of, you know, more defined brush strokes, like that's okay. This is a stylistic thing. These are just personal choices, how dramatic I want it to be or how soft. So with this color, I'm going to keep adding a little bit more yellow ochre pale, a little bit more white, just keep lightening it up without dramatically changing the color. Keep lightening it up and warming it up. A little bit more white, a little bit more yellow ochre pale. And then I'll use that back here. A little bit back here. And what we want to look at too is where do we want our most defined highlights to be? So definitely back here. That's really a cool highlight behind the pear. So we're gonna wait and use one of our lightest colors there. But I'm putting some lighter color around it to kind of soften the transition. And for this highlight, I think I'll probably move to the ivory brush so I can get this line a little bit straighter, cleaner. All right, and then we'll start putting this in. And I think we'll need to go a little lighter with that. I'll just put this in, but then we're gonna add another highlight on top of it. We got a little highlight up here. Do you see how this contrast of this line is becoming, you know, a bit more of a focal point, which, you know, maybe we want, maybe we don't want, maybe we want to soften that. It just, you know, you have to kind of, that's where you take a step back and say like, yeah, I'm liking this. No, this is too dramatic. I don't like it. I'm making it look a little more draped there. This is why you see artists though painting fabric, because it really does help with like just kind of asking those questions. Is it lighter? Is it darker? Capturing the way light falls on things. I'm gonna put just a little bit more of a highlight right there. I think I'm just gonna leave that top a little, kind of a little feeling unfinished, a little messy. We've got a little highlight. Ooh, that was a lot of paint. That's all right. We'll make it work. I'm just gonna add a little bit more of a highlight back there, so that fold is not so like all by itself. All right, and then, whoops, let's see, hang on. Gotta wipe off my brush a little bit here. Making a mess. Okay, so I'm gonna make a bigger pile on our gray here of titanium white and some yellow ochre pale. So we've got a nice warmer yellow. This is gonna be our brighter highlight here. And we'll come in and add even something a little lighter, because this is still a little gray, which is still what we want. We just want this to be really soft. Nothing's gonna be bright white. That's not what we want. We might add a little touch of that teeny little touch at just the brightest spot, and that's it. I like this style of painting too, because I feel like it has a very like old world quality to it. Just really classic. And I'm going a little bit thicker with the white now. Whereas before I was really kind of rubbing it in, I'm sort of, I'm starting to make this really a little thicker. Putting a little bit of a mid-tone there to transition to this highlight. And as we're getting to our brighter highlights, I'm going to add more white, a little more yellow ochre pale to my pile. So it keeps getting a little lighter, a little warmer. One thing that they say is a good exercise too, and they being like art teachers and people who write art books and stuff, is to use a bigger brush than you feel comfortable with, or one that's bushy. And that can help you get much more interesting, like it just, if you're tight, if you're someone who gets too tighty with your paint, it can help you just like, it kind of does the work for you. It makes you, it forces you to relax. Because even if you're being tight, like you just can't, you can only do so much if your brush is bigger than what you're trying to draw, or if it's bushier. Okay, so let's get this highlight in there. And it's not really this like straight line, so it can be, but we do want to retain, we don't want to blend. This is where you don't want to blend. You want this highlight to stay nice and clean. What you can do is you can hang your finger off the side of the canvas, or yeah, I'll do it off the side of the canvas to kind of help steady yourself. Okay, and then I don't want it to be quite as bright up above. We'll let this get a little darker. That is one reason why I like kind of working with a bushy brush. It just sort of forces me to relax a little bit. I tend to get way too tighty with my painting and too uptight. There's one wonderful book, I'll have to link to it. It's a Japanese man who does portraits, and oh my gosh, they're just beautiful. They're breathtaking portraits. And he says he always kind of self-sabotages at some point. Just puts a random pencil mark somewhere. I'm sure it's not all that random, but he'll just put a little, you know, he'll just sabotage it in some way so that it's just so it's not so perfect. If we want it to look exactly like the pear, we can just print up this picture. And what we want, though, is for us to be able to have some freedom to interpretation. So I'm going to take this brightest highlight that I have and just put it just a little bit on here. I don't want it to be distracting, but I do want to show that this is fabric that is folded in a way that's catching the light. And I think it's also kind of interesting how it's crossing the stem. I think that's kind of an interesting composition thing. All right, and then I can come in here. I'm fairly happy with the edges. I'm gonna fix that edge over there a little bit. I'm gonna add in a little bit of a brighter highlight right there. This is just the lightest highlight that I'm using in the shadows, and I'm gonna put a little one there, and then I'm gonna kind of blend it in just a little bit. And I'm gonna clean my brush now. Just kind of clean up that edge a little. I'm gonna go back to my shadow color. It's just ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. And I'm gonna kind of reclaim this little part of the pear that we got lost. And I'm gonna kind of just soften that a little bit. And then same thing over here. I'm gonna get the highlight color and just sort of gotta clean my brush a little better. Sometimes what I'll have to do is kind of, if my piles of paint are getting a little muddy just because I'm double dipping, I'll grab a little bit and kind of start a very clean pile, especially with white. Start a very clean pile. There are some people who are super fastidious about how they pull their paint out of the piles. Other people do what I do and just kind of dip. You just have to be aware of how muddy your colors might be getting, and then be prepared to kind of take a second and create a new pile so you get a nice clean white. I'm gonna do a little bit of a brighter highlight there. I love that kind of chunky paint there and there. I think that looks really cool against this very dark, soft, transparent color. Let me just compliment my work in front of all you guys. I'm so great, aren't I? I hope you're complimenting your work. I hope you do pieces that you fall in love with. That's just a sweet spot of painting, and we should feel the freedom to do that, because what we're gonna say to ourselves far more is just how bad our work looks. We're gonna be sure to tell ourselves that a lot. So if you're feeling really good about your work, then that's okay. Feel good about it. It'll pass. In no time, you'll be feeling bad about it again. Okay. Just kind of reclaiming that shadow just a little bit. I feel like we kind of lost it a little. I feel like this can be just a little darker. Maybe we'll put a little bit of this darker color kind of through here. I can see this is maybe a little darker. This is all just little adjustment stuff. And then maybe just a little bit of this kind of mid-tone shadow. I feel like we need a little more transition there. And then let me get a little bit more of this highlight in here. I don't want that line to be quite so harsh. I'm gonna soften that up a little bit. I'll look at questions here in just a minute. All right, let me work on the stem, and then I'll take some questions. So I kind of lost my darkest pile, so I'm just mixing up some new ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and we're just gonna finish off this stem. I want to make this just a little bit darker. It's almost black. And I want to make the top of this stem have a little character. We don't want it to be like just straight. Okay, and then I need some of this burnt sienna for a highlight. Burnt sienna, a little bit of white. Put just a little bit of a highlight up here. Just a touch down the stem. And then we'll use our kind of brighter highlight that we've been using down at the bottom here. Too bright. Scratch that. Let's use kind of this lighter burnt sienna. The white was too bright, too harsh. Okay, and then we need to kind of cut the background in around it a little bit better here. And same thing up here. We want to try to make those edges interesting, not just straight lines. And then maybe just a touch of this lighter highlight up here. So we got a little light hitting at the top. I think we might be done. Let me soften this a little bit. Soften this just a little bit. More people calling my kids. Okay, so I feel like just looking at it, I'd like to kind of fix this upper corner a little bit. So I switched to my bushy brush so I can blend a little bit more, and I'm going to put lighter highlight up here. Of course, it's an 11-year-old boy, so they just are persistent. They'll just keep calling and calling and calling until somebody answers. Okay, and then I'm gonna take just a little bit of yellow ochre pale, and maybe I want to add a little more yellow into some of these highlights just to kind of tie it into the pear. Just is interesting, I think. Just kind of add it in a few places. All right, I feel like we're done here. You can even add a little bit of lightness in here if you want to. A little bit of that bounced light reflecting off of the pear. All right, and then to sign it, I'm going to, again, grab my rubber brush here, and I'm going to scratch out my signature in the paint. That's how I sign my paintings. And what's cool is the underpainting stays below. So let me show you a close-up and also answer your questions. So there's kind of a close-up of the painting. You can see a bit more of the texture of the white. All right. Let me go back now and see questions. Yeah, the materials are listed on the blog. Here, the photo is also on the blog. So I would recommend going to the blog post, and you can download the photo and print it. And I also have other photos there that you can use for photo inspiration. Robin said, I got I got an important phone call. What was the first yellow? So what we were using is yellow ochre pale. That's this one with a touch of cadmium yellow as it got lighter. And then this is burnt sienna with a little white. All of this really is yellow ochre pale, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and just the teeniest touch of cadmium yellow in our brightest colors, and then titanium white. And oh, yay, Haley, you got your supplies. I think I already saw that comment. Okay, Carol, you wanted a close-up of the photo, which I showed. It looks like a hand grenade, Marion. That's okay. Just keep trying. So why do you paint the pear first instead of the background? It seems like it would be hard to put the background in without messing up the pear. So that's just how I learned to paint, is that you paint landscapes from back to forward, like the furthest away to the closest. And I learned painting still life that you paint the subject, you paint what's called the island, and then you paint the water around it. And it helps to actually, I think, make it look like the subject is sitting in the scene as opposed to like a flat object on the scene. So, but there are people who do it in reverse, and there are people who paint section by section. Like they'll paint this little section, then they'll paint that section, then they'll paint that one. This is just the way I do it. It doesn't have to be the way you do it. You can do it, and I've tried it both ways, and this is just how I prefer to do it. And Lorraine, it's your husband's birthday, so you missed the class. That's okay. Yes, and Susan, that's why I was so particular about softening that drape. It's just so, you want fabric to look soft. You don't want it to look like this hard stripe. And man, I definitely have paintings that look like that. Joe walked in when I was saying how great I was. I was kind of being facetious because I was just really happy with how this painting was turning out. Lorraine is just watching, which is fine. Let's see. I found the other colors blended so easily as I was painting, but I would lose the light color I was trying to achieve. Well, I think one of the keys is to make sure that you save the brightest whites for the end, because if you get too white too fast, then you end up with nowhere to go. So if you noticed as I was painting this, like the painting looked really dark and I really only added light. Even this, let's see if we use our, hold on just a second. I've got a value finder here. And when we look at what are the values that we used in this painting, we really have a very limited amount that's at the whitest white. Most of the painting falls in the darker range. And when you have a painting that's in a darker range, when you add those whites, they then really do look like light and they really pop. So I think you just have to be careful about whites. The other thing is once you start adding whites, it can be really hard to work them out. Joe, this is a canvas panel, not a linen panel. It's like this. I do paint on linen panels too, but this is that was my two-dimensional pear drawing. So I get them from Source Tech. These are a little bit pricier, so I would just use like a cardboard canvas panel, and I still paint on those too, but I would just use those so then you know, it's a few cents versus a few dollars, and then you feel like if you mess it up, that's okay. And Judy is crazy about the tonal technique. Yeah, I love it too. I think it looks really pretty. And just soft. My pear looks like it's in a thunderstorm. So Jody, I think then maybe you need to do more blending perhaps, or you maybe didn't add enough white perhaps. So I would just keep playing with that. And somebody said that your pear was getting too tall. So what you can do is cut around it with your background and try to fix that. So you can kind of fix as you go. So Tracy said her painting will be valuable because Miss Mustard Seed was your mentor. I don't know. I don't know about my paintings ever being super valuable, but we'll see. You know, you never know. I'm painting because I really love it, and selling them has been a kind of a byproduct, a little surprise that I've enjoyed. I love that people want to buy my work. But I do it because I really love it. So okay, well, I think, and Melinda, you're welcome for the Friday classes. I've enjoyed them too. So I think I'm not sure what we'll do next week. I know a lot of you are interested in moving into doing some portraits and animals, so I think we can get there definitely. Another request has been for some other kind of landscapes, maybe working with some more color. So I want to recommend a couple more colors to get. One of those is cadmium red. And when I do a portrait, I mostly use ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Burnt sienna can make wonderful skin tones, and yellow ochre pale. I'll use a little bit of cadmium yellow too. But I use the cadmium red on like cheeks and lips to really get that pinky red. Burnt sienna can make more of a peachy red, but as you can see, like these are some pretty good skin tones. And these grays make wonderful shadows for faces. So you can get really great portraits with those colors, but I like to add cadmium red. You're also going to need cadmium red if you want to do like cherries, strawberries, that kind of thing. You're not going to be able to get that red with the burnt sienna. The other color I would recommend is alizarin crimson. So alizarin crimson is a very transparent, kind of a purpley red. And again, it's great for doing cherries, blueberries, strawberries, that kind of thing. And then the cadmium red is more opaque. So you've got kind of this very transparent, reddish, pinkish color, purplish color, and then a very true red. I use cadmium red medium, but you can use whatever cadmium red you want. And then alizarin crimson, and I prefer the alizarin crimson that is by Winsor and Newton. It's much more of a jewel tone. And it's much more transparent, I've found, than like Gamblin is the other one I tried that I just did not like at all. I really didn't like it. I have other colors that I use by Gamblin, but I did not like their alizarin. I use their cadmium yellow and cadmium red medium are both Gamblin. So then we can do some, do some blueberries, cherries. I just got my first batch of cherries this week and they're my favorite. And here, I'll go ahead and let me turn the camera around. And, oops, I'm getting a low battery notification again. I don't know why it's not charging. Okay. Yeah, this is really strange. Very flattering angle right here. There we go. Okay. So I think I answered all the questions, but if you have any other questions, you can type them in real quick. So Hillary, the blue that is similar to, let me back up so it's not like right in my face. Oh, I came unplugged. Hang on, that's why. All right, the blue that is similar to Winsor and Newton ultramarine blue green shade is, you enjoyed the camera angle. I think, do you mean the one where you could see the painting better? Is that it? The ultramarine blue is by Utrecht. U-T-R-E-C-T-C. Hold on. Let me grab it. It's German. It's got a lot of C's and H's and T's in it, but it's pronounced Utrecht, or some people call it Utrecht. And you can buy a larger tube of it, and it's backwards. U-T-R-E-C-H-T. You can get it from Blick, or you can order it off of Utrecht as well. But I've started ordering this instead of the ultramarine blue-green shade because they're almost exactly the same kind of ultramarine blue, and I can buy a large tube of it, so it's more economical. Any other questions? Maybe I'll take, oh, it's almost 4, so we'll go ahead and sign off. But I do get a lot of questions about my palette, and the camera is too blurry, though, for me now. Okay, we'll have to figure out the perfect scenario. So what I'll do from here is I will take a palette knife, and I will section out the parts of the paint where I was messy. So I'll go kind of clean up my piles, and I'll create a big pile in the middle, and then I'll wipe all this up with a palette knife, and I'll create a pile that usually is some kind of a gray, and I'll put those piles over here to use later. And then I'll clean this surface with gamsol and then put on a little bit of linseed oil just to protect the wood. And then I'll just stick it in the closet just like this. Just with all the little piles of paint and everything on it, I just have this surface area nice and clean. And that's it. Yeah, I order my art supplies from Blick. Their prices are good and their shipping is good. I'm getting stuff in about 3 days. They did have some things out of stock, but I'm noticing stuff is coming back in stock. So I would order from there. I know a lot of my links go to Amazon, but I would suggest just going to Blick. And then, Joan, I don't usually use pure linseed oil. I use a mix that's in Carol Marine's daily painting book, and it's a mix of linseed oil, stand oil, which is a thicker linseed oil that's been allowed to stand around, which is why it's called stand oil, and gamsol. And it makes this nice little medium. So this is what I use when I need to thin the paint out. But as you know from painting with me, I don't use it very often. I use it like if I'm doing a portrait and I have a big background to fill, like on a 16 by 20, I'll add it to that just to kind of thin the paint out and get it moving. If I'm doing details, like very fine details, like on an eye, that I need the paint to be nice and thin, lay down a little easier, then I'll mix it then. Otherwise though, I usually just use the paint as is. If you're using a quality oil paint, you don't need to use a lot of mediums unless you're going for special effects. Yes, and Joan, it's in that book. I do share it on my blog somewhere. I'm not sure where I share that recipe, but it's in that book, so I would write that down. Denise, you ordered on May 7th and still haven't received your order, and it hasn't been shipped. So yeah, that's unusual. I've ordered a lot of things from Blick, and they've been coming. And I know, Jean, you're interested in doing like glass, water in a glass. A lot of people have asked for that, so maybe we'll do that next week. Add some glass in. And then my pear's looking a little rotten. I think I put too much ultramarine blue in the shadow. And that might be, I mean, just, you know, you can try adjusting it, or you can just pitch it and start again. That's fine too. There are times when I'm just like, I need a fresh start. I need to not, or wipe it down with gamsol. Just put some gamsol on a paper towel and wipe it all off and start again. And that's okay. Sometimes you need to do that. You need to abandon something and start fresh. So, all right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Man, a lot of you are saying you're not getting your Blick orders, which I'm so surprised because I have been getting mine very quickly. So there are a few things that were out of stock that did take a few weeks. So maybe that's the case, but usually they're pretty quick. So anyway, everybody have a great weekend. I will do a blog post. Usually it's on Tuesday. I put a blog post up that shares the video and it shares, you know, inspiration pictures and all of that stuff. So I'll be putting that up usually about on Tuesday, and that'll all be also a close-up picture of the painting so you can see it. So have a good weekend, everybody. We have beautiful weather here, so I hope you are enjoying good weather where you are, and you have a good weekend.